Okay, so let's talk about chapter 3 of Susan Wolf's Freedom Within Reason. We probably won't get to chapter 4 where she's laying out her view, although maybe I'll read the first paragraph of chapter 4. So let me just start by making, I don't know, some general contextual points about the way that she sees the issue of free will. She says one of the ways in which she thinks about this is that there's lots of things which are responsible, right? The clouds are responsible for the rain. The dynamite was responsible for causing the bridge to collapse, right? There's the I don't know, the fire is responsible for why there's smoke filling the sky. All of that responsibility is purely causal, right? It's not the interest. I mean, it's not the interest. It's the cause and effect. The fire causes the smoke, which causes, asthma, causes the sun to be blotted out. That's not the sort of responsibility we're interested in when we're interested in when we're talking about determinism and free will and moral responsibility and blameworthiness and praiseworthiness and all the sort of reactive attitudes of regret and pride and resentment and and being angry at your significant other for lying and cheating on you or things like that. Like that's not, we don't just mean purely cause and effect responsible. We mean, I'll just call it deep responsibility or moral responsibility, right? It's the sort of responsibility that humans can have, or we think humans can have. Maybe the hard determinist is right and we don't have this, but it's the sort of responsibility we think humans might have that hurricanes and crocodiles and fire does not. And that's the deep responsibility, or maybe you might call it moral responsibility, is the sort of responsibility that undergirds praiseworthiness and blameworthiness, right? It doesn't make any sense to blame or be resentful towards the hurricane and you might be angry, right? But it's not the sort of response you should have towards a hurricane or a dog or an alligator. There's a different sort of response you should have towards your fellow humans. And it seems to be tied up with this idea that humans are deeply or morally responsible in a different way than purely natural things in the world. Also, this deep responsibility or moral responsibility is something that we really value. It seems like something that's really important to us. And for example, it seems to undergird and be part of what makes us think about ourselves as making something of ourselves. Like it's not just that I'm being pushed around by forces in the world, like a pen or a rock or I don't know, a leaf floating down the river. I'm somehow responsible for what I'm doing. I'm making myself into the thing I am. So there's something, I guess, supposedly deeply valuable that we think this other form of responsibility brings about, that we care about. And that's going to come back up later at the end of this chapter when she talks about nihilism and Sartre and this like existentialists and who think that there's no such thing as value. That comes back at the very end, right? But it's sort of helpful to set up at the front is what we're interested in is trying to get at this idea that humans have this different sort of responsibility that's tied up with praiseworthy and blameworthiness and all of these other reactive attitudes, and also is something that we value very deeply and think is very important. So one way to try making sense of what makes us different from hurricanes and crocodiles is that we have autonomy. And autonomy is basically just libertarian free will, right? That I could do this or that, and I magically produce this instead of that, right? And we worry a lot, of course, we've already worried a lot, does the notion of autonomy or libertarian free will make any sense whatsoever, right? Because it doesn't seem like it could be determined. So it means we have to deny determinism. But if we deny determinism, then we end up with just randomness. Like we do things for no reason, no cause. And then that doesn't seem like free will either. So there's a worry here that autonomy, libertarian free will, which seems to be something that could make us deeply responsible, right? Because we're responsible because we're not being forced to do these things by outside forces. We're the ones producing it. But the worry here is if we're the ones producing it and not being caused by outside forces, it seems like then it's just we're just like randomly striking out. And that doesn't seem to be deep responsibility either. It doesn't seem to be something that could undergird or justify our practices of blameworthiness and praiseworthiness. It doesn't seem to be something we should value very deeply. So it seems to fail to get us all the things that we want from this notion of deep responsibility or moral responsibility. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about this real self view, and the real self view often makes this distinction between these two categories, right? There's the category of the kleptomaniac and the drug addict and the person who's being coerced, and there's the normal people we hold deeply responsible. And the difference might be this distinction between just mere people who are acting just from mere desires, that are in the grips of their mere desires, like the drug addict has this addiction for cocaine and that's just driving what they do, or the kleptomaniac who just has this overwhelming compulsion to steal, and also like animals which just have mere desires, and infants which just have mere desires, versus values. And values are also desires, but they're not just mere desires. The way she puts it at one point here in this chapter is that values are desires we don't merely just have, but we care about having, right? One way we talked about this coming out of Gary Watson was there's two ways to respond to a desire. You can either extinguish it or satisfy it. It seems like the ones we care about having are ones that we aren't happy with just extinguishing. We think that satisfying is important to us, not just merely extinguishing it. What does it mean to care to satisfy it and not just extinguish it? I assume that means that there's a second desire. Like I have the desire for something and then I have another desire that it's satisfied and not just extinguished. So really I think that values just means that you have to have a pair of desires, like the original one. And then there's a second one that like specifies that you actually really want to satisfy this one and not just extinguish it. There's another way of making sense of this distinction of desires versus mere values. And the real self view is the idea that comes from Harry Frankfurt, which I talked about, second order desires, which is kind of similar, basically very similar to that view, which is you've got all these desires towards the world. I want chocolate. I want warmth. I want a beer. The coke addict wants cocaine. The kleptomaniac wants to steal. But we have this ability, or we have this sort of self-awareness where we're like over and above our brute desires and we're looking down on them and deciding which ones. And what that is, according to this Harry Frankfurt view, is that you've got these second order desires, these higher level meta desires, and you're free, you're in charge, you're controlling yourself, you're acting from your values when you act from your meta desire. We call them higher order or second order desires. Maybe it'd be easier for you to remember if we just called them meta desires. And so like the drug addict is not responsible and not in control because they've got this desire for the drug, but their meta desire is to not to have that. They don't want to act on that desire. They don't want to have that desire. They want to get rid of it, right? So to be free is to have your higher level desires be in harmony with the lower level ones, that they're not in conflict, that you're able to do the things, not just the things you desire, but the things that you desire to desire, the things that you have the meta desires for. Your meta desires need to be in control. Your higher self-aware self, that's you. That's another way of cashing out this idea that these are both sort of real self views, basically. The idea is that your real self is somehow these higher level self-aware desires, or maybe it's the values you have and the desires you care about, which I guess also requires a second desire, a desire to satisfy the lower level desire and not just extinguish it. So I think they're both very similar. I think what Wolf wants to say here is that's not very convincing. She's not convinced because she thinks that the real self views turn out to hold people responsible that it shouldn't. We shouldn't hold responsible people who are raised by terrible parents and given really terrible second order desires, right? If you raise a sociopath who doesn't just want to kill people, but he wants to kill people, he fully endorses it. It's completely what he wants to do. He has no problem. And he's also got like no ability to be talked out of it or realize it's wrong or second guess it or have any, he has no, they literally cut out the part of his brain that generates empathy. Like, that the real self view is going to say, that person's responsible because they're doing not just what they desire, but what they want to want, right? What their meta desires are. And so they are doing what they value and acting from their higher self-conscious, higher level desire. So they're fully responsible. And I think Susan Wolf does not want to hold them responsible. She thinks that they had no chance of doing the right thing. They were screwed from birth. There was no, like, they were condemned to being trapped by doing the wrong thing. And so we shouldn't hold them responsible for doing the wrong thing because they had no chance to do the right thing, right? Their upbringing really. So that's one way in which she objects to the real self view. And the other way you might object to the real self view is you might say, why does if our worry was acting from desires wasn't free, because our desires are determined for us and you're just doing what you desire and you're like whatever desires your genetics and your upbringing and your environment caused to rise up in you drive your behavior. If we worry that that's not free, how does adding a second level of desires change anything, right? That's another sort of objection. It's like, well, why does this? And I think she wants to say here, she says this a couple times, although it's hard to make this point. Deep responsibility is something that we deeply value. We think is super important. Why do we care? Why would we care that we're acting not just from our desires, but our second level? Like, what is so special about those? I mean, I think you can tell a story about how we are these self-aware beings, and these second-order desires are precisely what it is to be this second-order, higher-level being that's looking down on my first. Like, that's what we are. We are this, unlike animals, which just run around on their instincts, their desires of the moment. They don't have that sort of stepping back for self-awareness. So maybe there is a case to be made for this idea that, like, no, the second-order desire stuff really says something about who we are, and it does make sense to think of that as really truly us when we're acting from our second order desires. But I think Susan Wolf doesn't buy it. She thinks that that's not, what do I want to say here? Yeah, that's both for the psychopath being the psychopath reason, holding the psychopath's responsible reason, and also I think she just doesn't buy the idea that there's anything truly valuable or blameworthy or praiseworthy that comes out of adding some extra hierarchy of desires to explaining our actions. So she's going to offer a different view. She's going to talk about values being not some not some desire hierarchy where you've got a second level desire talking to the first level. You know, she wants to say that our values and who we are is when we act from desires that we believe or judge to be good, right? Worth X, like what does it mean to value? It means to judge that this is a desire that's worth carrying out, to think it's important to do it. So she calls this, and she's going to say that that's equivalent to acting from desires that we have reason for. Right? It's when our rationality is in control, when we evaluate our lower level desires and which ones we act from and which ones we don't act from is under the control of our rational abilities and our ability to think through what desires we have good reason to respond to and which ones we have no good reason. So, for example, if I've got, I don't know, a crazy urge to jump off a cliff out of nowhere, right? Don't have any good reason to act on that desire. If I do jump, then that was not free, right? It wasn't my rational self. I mean, just to give, I don't know, 2 examples of me doing something very similar to this. I remember when I was very young, I was coming to a stop sign and I saw a cop sitting at the other stop sign and some fucking voice in my head just said, gun it. And so I did. And I like blasted through it. And I don't know, the cop didn't notice, I guess. So it was fine. The other more scary time was I was sitting at an intersection with an army buddy of mine, and there's like really busy traffic going in both directions. And he said, man, just gun it, you know, ironically. And I mean, wow, actually there's kind of a consistency in these stories here. And so I did, I just, you know, hit the gas and went straight into oncoming, like heavy traffic going in both. And, you know, the minute I did it, I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? And he's like, oh my God, what are you doing? And I'm just like turning the wheel, trying not to hit anybody. Didn't cause an accident, didn't hit anybody. A minor miracle. There turned out to be like a good amount of space in between the 2 lanes that I was able to like kind of but those would be cases where my rational abilities were not in control, right? Those are those lower level desires, not the ones that I thought that I had good reason for or I judged are worth doing. So those would be unfree actions. Same thing for drug addicts, same things for kleptomaniacs, things like that. Okay, so there's a lot of hands up. I'm going to stop. So let me just stop on one last point here. So she's saying, she's ultimately trying to argue here that our real self, I guess, is our rational self, right? It's not necessarily the higher level desires. It's not just the desires that I want to satisfy and not just, it's the ones that my rational capacity, my reasoning abilities endorse, and I'm free when my reason's in control. And she's going to worry, and we're going to talk about this next, because most of this chapter is about this other problem, which is, are you any more free if you're determined by reason instead of your desires, right? So the worry here is that autonomy, the libertarian free will, wants not just the ability, like my free real self, according to libertarian, isn't my rational self. It's also not like my desiring self or my higher level desiring self. It's the ability to like step back from all of that and just make a totally radical choice. I could choose against reason. I could choose against desire. So she's going to have to defend this idea, and she's going to defend the idea that, oh, no, our real self is our rational self. It's not this totally free, autonomous thing that could choose against reason. We're free and we're acting from our real selves when we act from reason, and it's perfectly consistent to be totally determined by reason and yet also count as free and responsible. Like the being determined by desires and causes, that's different. That is problematic to freedom. She doesn't think being determined by reason conflicts with freedom and responsibility. Now, that's a controversial view. Most of this chapter is her trying to fight off somebody who disagrees with it and thinks like, no. True freedom means being able to be free, not just from desires, but be free from reason as well. So let me go down some of these hands here. So Joshua.
Yeah, so I was just thinking about like, we use these examples a lot about like brain tumors or, neurological disorders and stuff. So so please correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm understanding is that she's saying that like, despite, so like, I don't know, for example, if I wanted to practice drawing, right? But I'm in like a really depressive state and I just can't get myself to do it. But in my head, I'm like, but I want to, like, I want to improve. Then that's the higher thinking there is like, I want to do it. But
it's more than that. I think that sounds more like the other views, like the Harry Frankfurt and the Gary Watson, where there's like the second level of wants, like you want to improve. And that's, so you're pushing, you don't want to practice, but you want to practice, and you don't want your procrastination, your desire to be lazy to win out. And so like the second level want, so I think you sound kind of like the second level wants sort of view. I think that on her view, it's for you to say, I recognize there to be good reason for me to practice this, right? If I don't get good at this, then I'm not good at anything, then I'm going to be miserable and I won't be able to get a job, and I'll have nothing to take pride in. And being accomplished artist is a worthwhile pursuit. That's a valuable thing to do with yourself. Like, so I think it's the judgments. It's the idea that you're recognizing the reasons for doing it, and that being in control is what I think she's trying to say is when you're in control. Like this much more cognitive thing rather than desiring thing. Joshua, what do you think?
Okay, so I think it's not so much as a so wanting to want to do something is not like the meta thinking. That's just like a higher level of desire.
Yeah, I mean, and most people, and the Harry Frankfurt view and the Gary Watson view think that higher level of desire is the perspective that we have on our lives, right? When I step back from my addictions and I wish I didn't give into them, and when I'm struggling to make myself go work out, that's just me, and me is this higher level of desire. Now, she doesn't think that that's me. She thinks what's me is this ability to judge to make judgments, to have beliefs about what's worth doing. So it's not higher level desires. It's beliefs and, respond and thinking about reasons about what's good, what's worthwhile and valuable to do. So it's slightly different than just having a higher level desire. So she's going to have to claim that there are real desires, let me just say that again. She is going to have to claim that there are real reasons for what you should and shouldn't do, that there are things that are worth doing and things that aren't worth doing. And maybe like lying is something you have reason not to do. And I don't know, spending your life in philosophy, we talk a lot. There's a philosopher named John Rawls that has an example of, I don't know if her name is Mary, but he likes to use this thought experiment of Mary, who all she wants to do is count blades of grass on her lawn. She's going to count every blade of grass on the lawn. And then when she's done, she's going to start back over. And the claim here is that that's not a worthwhile activity. That's a waste of a life, particularly if she has other, skills that maybe she's even neglecting her children. Maybe she's, et cetera, et cetera. So the claim here would be Susan Wolf is committed to there being answers, truths, about what is a worthwhile thing to do and what's not. And we are in control when our rational self, the self that can recognize the things that are worth doing and not worth doing. And that's what's controlling what we do. Does that help, Josh?
Yeah. So just like very quick. So is she saying they're like objective things that are like
yes.
apply to everyone?
Yes. And now if you want to push back against that and be like, well, I don't think that there are objective values. That's what comes up at the very, very end, right? At the very end, she takes on the objection of the nihilist who says, your whole view here depends on our real selves being our ability to respond to the objective reasons out in the world about what we should do. But what if I don't think that those reasons exist? And she's going to take on that view at the end. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not going to have a lot of time to answer questions today just because I have a lot to get through. If I want to get through chapter 4. So maybe I'll take some more in a little bit. But so she's worried here about the person who's basically the metaphysical libertarian, the person who believes in who wants not just my rational self to be they want autonomy. And autonomy, like real metaphysical libertarian free will is that real self is not somebody who just acts from reason. It's somebody who can freely choose to act from reason or choose not to act from reason, right? Somebody who can choose to act from desires and choose not to act from desires. They are somebody who can do things on no basis, right? This is the sort of arbitrary, this is a worry. I mean, you might worry that this libertarian autonomous view is making out free will to be just random choice. But that seems to be the claim. It's like the worry here is that Susan Wolf is saying, we're free if I act from reason, but what if I'm like, I love this. I love this line. She says, what if I'm inescapably sane, right? I can't do, I am so committed and well raised that I act from reason and I couldn't possibly do an irrational thing. I couldn't possibly fail to do the right thing here. Is that freedom? Shouldn't I have the choice to do the wrong thing, to be, and in order to, if you think that makes sense, then now we start to seem to be slipping into this autonomy metaphysical libertarian view where it seems like I need the ability to just make what we sometimes call a radical choice, a choice on no basis whatsoever, to either act on, I have good reasons for doing something and I can choose, I'm gonna go do this irrational thing instead, right? Not just the ability to choose against my desires, but also to be able to choose against reason. So do we think that freedom, the sort of freedom that we need for moral responsibility also requires us to be free from reason and be able to, just choose against acting rationally? Or, as what Susan Wolf's going to argue, no, that freedom and moral responsibility is perfectly satisfied by somebody who is determined unavoidably to act from reason. So let me get to that. Let me give you an example of acting from reason too. I mean, here's one example. Suppose that, and this is often true of me, I pay for my gym membership every month at Planet Fitness for $10 a month or $15 or whatever it is. But then I never go, right?
Do they have Planet Fitness in Turkey?
No, they don't. I canceled it. I canceled it once the pandemic started.
Just didn't know about their international market penetration, but Sounds like they're not there.
That would be impressive. I mean, it is Planet Fitness, right? It is kind of like a lie that like you would think it's false advertising that they're not here. Yeah, I did see a gym down the street that's like USA Gym, and it has like all these like guys with like American flags and these huge muscles, and it's like I was like, all right, I guess. So it's irrational for me to do this, right? What should I do? I should either cancel the gym membership, so I'm not blowing this money every month for no reason, or I should go work out and use it, right? The irrational thing to do is to keep paying but not go, right? That's a failure of my part to respond to reason, for my rational self to be control. That's one example, I think, of a failure of your rational self. Do I think it's more free to have the ability to choose to be irrational in this way? I think this is one of her objections. Is like, all we want to do is be rational and like not be the person who, the person who either cancels the membership or starts to work out. It's not like we want the freedom to be able to be the person who's paying the gym membership but then not going. Like, that's something that none of us want. So it's a weird. So one objection she raises here is it's a little weird to say that this freedom, this responsibility that we take to be so important and valuable, that we think is really, really crucial to our lives, is the ability to choose to act irrationally, despite the fact we would never want to do that, right? And she talks about, like, if I've got a choice between I'm starving and there's some food over there that I really like, and over there is some food I hate that's in fact also poisoned and going to make me throw up. And she's like, well, reason says go eat that one. Does the freedom that we want, is the thing that's so important to us, the ability to choose to take the poison? And instead, she thinks that it's a little odd to say that moral responsibility and this free will that we care so deeply about is the freedom to pick something that we would never want to pick, right? That no one would want this thing. So it's a little bit, so one objection here is that she doesn't think that the autonomy view makes good sense of why free will is valuable. Whereas if you think free will and responsibility is the ability to act from reason and have my reason in control, it's easier to understand why this would be something we value and think is really important. So that's one move she makes. The other thing is she brings up this example of a drowning child. So imagine you've got this drowning child, and there's two drowning children, two different people, two different ponds. They're not near each other, I guess. Be a little weird if they were all together, I guess. So both of them see the child drowning, and let's say that objective values, objective reasons. There is an objective reason for them to save a drowning child. If let's say it's no risk to themselves, and they both go do it. Right? They both recognize, I mean, maybe they think it through, maybe they don't, right? You can respond to reasons without thinking things that you can just if I see something hurtling at my face, I can duck down, and there's a good reason for me to duck down. I don't have to necessarily think. I mean, you can be responsive to reasons in a very instinctual way. So maybe they think it through, maybe they don't, but they both respond to the reason that they see. They see a drowning child. They recognize that that's a good reason to go out and save the child. And so they go do it. Now, one of them is just so thoroughly rational, so thoroughly committed to doing the right thing that they had no, I guess, freedom here, no autonomy to choose to do the irrational thing. They were just 100% always going to run out and save that kid. There was no question. There was no possible world where they didn't do that. The other person is less rational, a little less responsive to reasons, and there was kind of a good chance that they might have been like, I don't know, the water's cold, or I don't know, they do something impulsive, and just like driving out in the traffic. Like their reason, or their ability to respond to the reasons that they see in the world for how to act is less, I don't know, vigorous, solid than the other person. So she says both of them, she wants to say they're both, well, here's what's weird here. She wants to say, if you think autonomy is required for praiseworthiness and responsibility, then the person who's more praiseworthy, maybe the only person who can be held responsible and is praiseworthy, would be the person with the less, like the less solid rational abilities, the person who might not have saved the kid, who might have like decided to do something else, to I don't know, do something stupid instead, right? There's poison sitting next to them. There's a kid drowning, and they choose to drink the poison instead. You're like, why would you do that? They're like, I don't know. I just decided to choose to do the irrational thing. Like that. Now, this person did do the rational thing. They went out and saved the kid, but this person was kind of on the edge. They could have gone either way. She wants to say it's really bizarre to think that that person's more praiseworthy and that than the other person who was determined automatically going to do the rational thing, right? There was no question. So she thinks that she makes the argument here that our notions of who's praiseworthy here, the person who we think is the better person, is the one who is more determined by reason, not less determined by reason, right? The less determined, the autonomy view has this weird way in which it seems like it's the person who might choose to do the stupid thing is the more is the one who's actually responsible, or the only one who's praiseworthy for saving the kid, because they might have drinking the poison instead. Whereas the other guy, he was never going to drink the poison because he was so determined by reason. So she thinks the autonomy view is weird for that reason. I don't have much time, so I do want to get to this one last, the nihilism stuff, and we'll talk more about this when we get to, I guess, discussion sections. So the last objection she considered, so I think at that point, that's kind of her basic argument for the idea that responsibility and freedom in the sense that we mean it and care about it is the ability to act from reason, not the radical choice, not the ability to choose against reason or against desire. It's the ability to choose against desire to do what's rational, what we have reason to do, right? To do the right thing. And that's something we value because it's our ability to do the right thing, right? And so that makes sense why we value it. So this account can make better sense as to why we care about and value free will and deep responsibility. It also makes better sense of, for example, this child drowning case. It seems like the person is more praiseworthy when they're more under the control of their reason rather than less. Now, she raises the worry of nihilism, right? The worry that there are no reasons in the world about what you should or objective reasons about what you should or shouldn't do, right? There are no values. So this view assumes that these two people have good reason to save the drowning child and no good reason to drink the poison, even reason against to drink the poison. So you might say, what's the nihilist going to say? The nihilist is going to say, there's no such thing as reasons. Everything is just an arbitrary choice. You can't say, this person's more responsive to reasons and that person's less because nobody has reason to save the kid or drink the poison. It's just random. It's just arbitrary choices we make, right? There's no such thing as objective values. There's nothing better about saving the child or bad about than drinking the poison. So her response to the nihilist is that she thinks that makes the nihilist is trying to save free will, right? The nihilist wants to say, I'm objecting to your view of free will, Susan Wolf. I don't think it has to do with reason responsiveness, the ability to guide your actions according to the objective reasons. I think it's autonomy. And my argument that it's autonomy is that those reasons don't exist. So your view can't possibly work, right? And her response to that sort of nihilist is to say, you can't make moral responsibility work if you hold those views. If you're a nihilist, then for one thing, being free doesn't matter, right? We were curious. One of the things we were trying to explain as to why free will and moral responsibility and why it's such an important thing and why it's so valuable, and nothing's valuable to the nihilist. So that's one worry. The other worry is that she thinks that it makes us all just causally responsible and not deeply or morally responsible, right? It's important for the notion of moral responsibility, right? We want to understand the way in which we become responsible that makes sense of praise and blame and holding people responsible and resent. And that all of that would not make sense if you're a nihilist, right? There would be no such thing as praise and blame because there's no such thing as a right and wrong thing to do. So she thinks that if you try to save the autonomy view, the metaphysical libertarian, by taking this nihilist route, you have the problem is that you eliminate all values and all reasons and all things that are good or bad to do, and that ultimately means that you can't have any notion of deep responsibility. All that's left is merely causal responsibility, the one that doesn't have anything to do with praise or blame. And so then you ultimately lose the ability to, I mean, the whole reason we wanted to be metaphysical libertarians in the first place, right, was to be able to make sense of deep responsibility, the one that like makes sense of praise and blame. And yet now we're saving the metaphysical libertarian autonomy view by adopting nihilism, which then completely makes us unable to hold on to deep responsibility. Like now we're back, we might as well be hard determinists if we're going to end up giving up on all values anyway, right? So like why, so if to save the autonomy metaphysical libertarian view, you got to be a nihilist. Why were we doing this in the first place? Why don't we just all be hard determinists and we can be nihilists, hard determinists instead of nihilist metaphysical? She thinks that metaphysical libertarian nihilists make no sense. And so that's her argument here for reason being, I think, our deep selves to be the sense of responsibility and freedom that makes sense of praise and blame, and why she thinks the autonomy view, the metaphysical libertarian can't do it. And if we're out of time, but I did want to read, I won't do it, but the first page of chapter 4, you might take a look at that ahead of time, just because it's really nice where she just sort of summarizes the view that she finally gets to here, where she says, to be the capacity to, be responsible and be free is the ability to act, to act in response to the right and the good, to do the right thing for the right reason, right? That's what our freedom and responsibility consists in. Okay, I'll stick around in case people have questions. I will have more time to talk in discussion sections. And this is also, just to remind you, this is also why I decided to delete or take down the video that I posted for you to watch, because I think that there's just so much here in this chapter and the next chapter that I need some more time to put up a lecture explaining some more stuff in these chapters. So there's just so much here. So I'll get that recorded. But thanks, guys. I'll see you on Friday, and I'll stick around if anybody has further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Professor.
Yeah.
I wasn't here like before when you were making announcements, but because my Wi-Fi was going in and out.
Sure.
What did you say?
Oh, I don't know. We're reading chapters 3 and 4 of this book. And I took down the video lecture that I posted, but I'll put a new one up in the next day or two. I'll put an announcement out because I'm switching out the one I'm assigning. And next week is spring break. And then when we come back, we'll have discussion week. So you have no reading. This is, this is very long to get through the 4 chapters of this Freedom Within Reason book from Susan Wolf. But you have this week, you have all of spring break, and then you also have, all of discussion week to catch up. And I'll also make discussion week discussion forum available for you to start posting over spring break if you want to get a head start on it. That's, I think, basically everything.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So you said, sorry, the discussion form was due.
Oh, you got a while. It's gonna be all next. You got all spring break, and then you also got all the next week. You got 2 weeks.
Okay, and then the quiz.
The quiz will be at the end of discussion week, so that's also really far away.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify something about this Susan Wolf, her point of view.
Man, I can't wait to do chapter 4. I was reading this. I was rereading it today, and I'm just like, oh my God, this is all. It's not all right, but it's like so great.
Yeah, so I think so. I have from the discussion that we had today, I was just confused about. So she says the more we act from reason, the more control we have, the more responsible we are for those actions. Is that what she says?
Yeah, and I mean, so acting free is either acting from reason, right? You're responsible when you act from. Like, it's your capacity to act from reason that it constitutes your freedom and your responsibility. Now, if you act in chapter 4, she's going to talk about this. If you act wrongly, right? She's still going to count that free if you could have acted from reason, like it wasn't that you were condemned to act not from reason, but you just have. Now, I think what she says in that chapter is incoherent. Like when she talks about that part, she really falls apart. She basically puts forth a libertarian view of, like, basically I think she can fix it up a couple different ways. I think one thing she could do is she could tack on a compatibilist account of what it means, like of acting wrongly. I mean, she could fix that up. She doesn't. Like she doesn't get that to work in this book, but there are things she could say there. She could also, and this is a view that I think no one else, I don't think I've ever heard any other philosopher hold this, but I kind of deeply think that this might be true, is that maybe we're only free and responsible when we're doing the right thing, and no one is ever free or responsible when they're doing the wrong thing. When you're doing the wrong thing, it's because causal forces have gotten a hold of you, right? Every lie, cheating, stealing, everything you do wrong is just like the drug addict, right? Now, that's a very radical view. It's also a view that not just Susan Wolf runs into. This crops up with Immanuel Kant. If you read Kant's views on morality and his views on free will, his theory leads him pretty directly into that same result, and then he has to do a bunch of stuff to try getting out of it too. People are always trying to fix that, and I'm always kind of like, well, if we keep getting led into this result, maybe it's not that we're not, maybe we shouldn't maybe we're just getting led to the truth, guys. Maybe we need to come to terms with the fact that blame doesn't exist, but praise does. Like right action exists, but not wrong action.
Yeah, so but I mean, if you were to think that more reason means more free, if the example that you gave, that you went crazy with the car, and if you had accidentally hit someone, would then that mean that because you're not acting within reason, you would deserve no blame? And on the other hand, if someone, let's say, saves the drowning child, but they are going, I mean, there is no good reason to, because they don't know how to swim, or maybe they themselves, there's a good chance that the both of them will drown.
Well, so you might say that there's objectively good reasons not to risk yourself for, I think that sort of the drowning case that you're giving is, I think you're just saying, well, what if the case was slightly different and you had reasons not to do this, right? I mean, she doesn't really take a stand on what reason. I mean, she does in other work what reasons exist, but here she's just saying whatever account of reasons you want. Maybe you think all reasons are self-interested, right? You only have reason to do things that make you happy. You have no reason to help anyone else. I think that that's very wrong, but not immoral, but I think just philosophically incorrect. I don't mean, but if you thought that was true, you could still make sense of her account, right? Freedom would be responding to self-interested reasons, and you would be wrong to go act selflessly, right? Because you should always, that would be that. So you could have a different account of reasons than the one she's giving. She's not even giving an account of reasons. She's just kind of throwing out random examples to give, and you can plug in whatever account of reasons or objective values you want. Now, your other case was, what about the person who acts irrational? So let's say that there is a person who sometimes acts for reason, but sometimes doesn't, and they drink the poison instead of, like for example, me, when I drove out into traffic, right? Let's say that it was not, I mean, that was sort of an impulsive, immediate desire that kind of sprung out of nowhere, and maybe I couldn't have resisted it because it was so surprising, right? But maybe the desire is a little slower, right? Maybe it's just like, you're married, you've got a wife and kids. It's going to ruin your life if you sleep with your secretary or your buddy or like whatever, and your boss. But you have this like ongoing kind of simmering desire for it, and one day you do it, right? You give into that desire. Now, you probably could have I mean, what she wants to say is and then your life is ruined and da-da-da. That's not like me with that impulse where, like, this seems like you could have with more effort and willpower kept your reason in control, and you could have acted from reason. So she wants to say you're responsible because your reason was in control. It just didn't do its job, I guess. Now, I think that is a very difficult claim for her to make, because that sounds like some sort of compatibilist. When you act from reason, compatibilism is true. You can be just totally determined. But when you act wrongly, there needs to be this sort of libertarian possibility that you would have chosen to act from reason. So I think that she has a problem there. I mean, in this book, she kind of admits it, and then she sort of says, I don't know, next book, right? So she doesn't really give an account. But I think she could give an account, I guess. I mean, the other thing to say is I'll say this next week too, is I think Susan Wolf is right. I'm not sure if she's right to be a compatibilist, because you could also take her view and make it a metaphysical libertarian view. You could say that acting, and she says this in chapter 4, maybe acting from reason, to be able to act from reason, means that you're not caused, right? If I'm acting, how can I be responding to reasons if I'm being caused by things? Being responsive to reasons means I have to be doing it for the reasons, not for the causes. So maybe her whole view has to be a metaphysical libertarian view, but I think it's an improvement on the metaphysical libertarian view, because the metaphysical libertarian view has this sort of randomness to it, right? Her view offers this idea of a metaphysical libertarian where you're free when you're determined by reasons, and when you're determined by reasons, you're not determined by causes, and so you are free from the causal order. So I think I buy what Susan Wolf is saying. I don't know. I think she's got some problems on the negative side about when you act wrongly, and I think the other thing I'm not sure she's right about is I'm not sure if she should be a compatibilist. I think maybe she should be a metaphysical libertarian. I'm actually really uncertain. I think I could go either. I think she's right about her view. I just have no idea whether it makes more sense as a libertarian or a compatibilist view.
Makes sense, cool. Thank you.
Julia, what do you got?
Oh, I was just here to be a fly on the wall.
Okay,
Because I
Hudson,
knew
what do
Kush
you
was
got?
probably going to ask a question.
So I just had a quick question. So when I was reading the chapter and like the whole raising a psychopathic child came up, so I like wrote a couple stuff down and I was trying to like think through it. So where would like conditioning play into that? And like where I'm like, does conditioning become like a belief? Like even when it's like, so I was thinking like basic training, you know, in the military, they'll basically, when you come out of it, you're still like clean, or you pick up habits that are positive afterwards. Is that a good, because it's like,
Yeah, no, I think she thinks
belief?
that, I mean, your rational abilities are conditioned. Your parents raised, you have to be raised to be responsive to reasons and to like think critically and to be able to know. So I think she wants to say, because she is a compatibilist here, right? She wants to say being conditioned, trained into being responsive to reasons, that's the thing we do to our kids, and that's fine. That we're making them free. We're giving them the capacity to respond to reasons, to be responsible agents. If you're being conditioned and brainwashed to do wrong things so that you can't respond to reasons. So for example, I brainwash you with some crazy conspiracy theories, and I teach and I also like raise you to have all of these defensive mechanisms, right? So every time some evidence comes in to contradict your conspiracy theory, you've got these ways to like save it, right? So it's like when the flat earthers, they see pictures of the Earth and then they say, well, that's just NASA with their evil schemes. And you're like, well, why would all these people be out to trick you about, and they start, they can just, conspiracy theories you can always save. We call them unfalsifiable theories, right? That's one of the reason they're unscientific is because they're unfalsifiable. There's never a test of whether they're true, because no matter what comes in, they'll just revise or add to the theory to keep it alive. Now you can imagine somebody who's, lots of people who have this sort of conspiratorial thinking. You could raise somebody to like be paranoid, like to be like that, and they wouldn't have the chance to ever respond to like they're trapped in that inescapable way of thinking. And you could also make it worse. Feed them, put some lead in put some lead paint on their toys, so they're also kind of stupid, right? Give them an IQ of 80, right? Give them an IQ of 80, teach them to be conspiratorial thinkers, et cetera. Now, and maybe train them, right? Maybe like in the sort of basic training kind of, you probably don't even need all of these things. But then she thinks that person is not able to respond to reasons. And so they're not responsible. They had no chance but to do, they couldn't recognize reasons if they tried, or if you gave them good evidence or good argument, they couldn't respond correctly to it because they're so trapped in their conspiratorial thinking and their dumbness, I guess.
So I was thinking that the way she was pointing out was like, you can only be brainwashed for bad things, but she's also saying like, you can be brainwashed for good things and that still removes your reasoning.
Well, you could be what do you mean by brainwash? By good things would be brainwashing you to, I don't know, evaluate evidence in good ways and be critical. I mean, when you teach a kid to question things, right? Like they're scared of their teacher, and you say, I don't care that you're scared of your teacher. When she says something wrong, I want you to stand up for yourself, or when she says something cruel to your queer classmate, I want you to say, stand up in class and say, don't do, that's wrong, miss, what, and that ability to like stand up to authority is a scary thing and also to like question your, so you might like, that's also taught, right? I mean, that's the difference between brainwashing and teaching is probably brainwashing is when I program into you bad things, and teaching is when I try to give you good things, right? Make you, it's probably it's not that the techniques are different. It's just that the content is different. It's when, and I think she wants to say is I'm making you into a being who can think for themselves and respond to reasons and do the right thing and recognize the right thing and think through arguments and come to the right conclusions. Whereas the brainwasher is, I don't know, just trying to get you to be a sex slave or something, or a murderer or something like that. And that's
so. Where would you place like kind of focusing on, because I guess I'm still like kind of stuck on the whole like, because I was also thinking like the basic training, but also even like the prisoner mindset where like they become institutionalized. Okay. So is that drill sergeant basically, but he's not teaching you, or I mean, he's teaching you, but he's where would that be? Because he's teaching you to be like, say that they're teaching you to be clean, right? Or
yeah.
Fold you up to make your bed. Is that, I guess that's a good value, but then he's not telling you to, like you should think about why you should make your bed, or like.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's something interesting here. I don't know what she would say here. And I think there's some interesting philosophical problems here. Are you responding to reasons if you don't know why? Like if I just program you to help children, like if I program you to help children, right? When they're in need, but you have no empathy, you're a sociopath, you have no empathy, you have no idea why. And it's completely similar to me. Also, I also programmed you to do jumping jacks at noon every day. And so you do both of those things and they're totally equivalent to you. It's not clear to me that you're responding to reason when you're saved. Now that might not, I think there are philosophers who disagree. In fact, I wonder if Susan Wolf would disagree. There might be philosophers who say, you are responding to reason. There's a reason to save the kid, and you see the kids are in need, and so you go and save them. You don't know why. You don't know it's a reason, but you don't have to know. You don't have to understand the reason to be able to respond to a reason. I don't. That's actually a big debate. We call de re versus de dicto. So de dicto, when you respond to reasons de dicto, DE space DICTO, that means under the description of as a reason. Like I recognize it as a reason. I'm like, oh, that kid's in need, and that's a reason for me to go help them. And so I'm going to go help them. So de dicto responding to reasons is I'm responding to recognizing it as a reason, and that's the reason I respond to it. De re, DE space RE, this is a very complex high-level philosophy debate. De re responding to reasons is I don't recognize it as a reason. I just respond to the good reason. So one of the classic examples of this is Huckleberry Finn. So Huckleberry Finn he's on the boat. It's at night. He's got an escaped slave with him, Jim, and they're on their raft going down the Mississippi. And right now, I mean, Huckleberry Finn is feeling really bad about helping Jim escape, because helping a slave escape is equivalent to theft and stealing, right? So he thinks he's doing something wrong. But Jim is nice, and Huckleberry Finn doesn't want to see somebody doesn't want to see someone hurt or imprisoned or taken away. And I think he probably knows that slavery is not very fun, and Jim's doesn't want to, and he's kind of building they sort of start to build a friendship. So they're on the boat, and it's night, and some white slavers or police or something on the shore shout out because they can hear the boat going. They're like, "Hey, have you seen any escaped slaves?" Right? And Huckleberry Finn tries to shout out, "Yes, I've got one on the boat," but he can't bring himself to say it. He can't. He's like, the words are stuck in his throat. And afterwards, he says to himself, "You know what? I'm just a bad person. he just makes peace with the fact that he's an immoral thief and he's fine with it, right? I'm just going to be friends with Jim and be a bad person, right? So he is a nice example of someone who's it seems like he's responding to reasons, but de re, right? He doesn't realize they're reasons. And so that's one of the classic arguments that responding to reasons can be de re, ones that you don't even notice are reasons. It's just enough to respond to them correctly that counts. Now, there are other philosophers I've often argued, although I don't know if I'm right, that it has to be de dicto. I think that you have to, I think that there's something wrong with Huckleberry. It's very cute, but I think that there actually is something wrong with the Huckleberry Finn case. But I suspect that Susan Wolf would take the de re route. I think that she would say it's enough that Huckleberry Finn was responding to reasons. It's even worse. He thought they weren't reasons. He thought he had reason to do the opposite, right? So he's going against what he thinks his reasons are, but he's responding to the reasons his good nature, his empathy, his feelings, his emotions are the better guide to reasons in this case than his explicit beliefs and thinking. And so some philosophers think that it doesn't matter what it's, how it comes about that you're responding to reasons. It's just that you are responding to reasons.
Okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate the help. I think I might have to go read the chapter again because now that I kind of got it figured out.
It is a hard chapter. And I've been rereading chapter 4 right now, and it seems to get a lot easier because at chapter 4, she's already built up all the hard work and now she can just, give her view, and most of her view kind of gets developed in chapter 3 anyway. But chapter 3 is it's talking about whether it's important to be free to act against reason. I mean, these are difficult philosophical issues. And at the end, it's talking about nihilism and whether that objective value, if we deny objective value, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just saying that it's a tough chapter, but I think it's a very rewarding chapter and a very worthwhile chapter.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the help. I appreciate it.
Everybody? Anybody else? All right. You guys take care.